In the moments after an attack, victims are treated, security is stepped up, and the manhunt for those responsible begins. It's a pattern no nation wants to endure. But Turkey was flung into it again when 39 people were killed at the Reyna nightclub. Security was tight in Istanbul on New Year's Eve. 25,000 police officers were on duty. Reyna itself had standard protection in place. There were some security guards and a police officer out front. Yet the attacker was able to take a taxi to the club, enter from the street, shoot his way through, and simply walk away after the massacre. So what, if anything, can be done to minimise the threat of urban terrorism in the first place? In the wake of attacks in France, Belgium, Germany, and Turkey, security measures have been tightened at large gatherings and in public areas. And that's usually been in the form of highly visible and physical precautions, from cordoning off spaces to boosting the police and military presence at venues, a move designed to both deter an attack and reassure the public, which was the case in Berlin ahead of New Year celebrations.
Wir werden im Bereich der Festmeile am Brandenburger Tor Betonpoller aufstellen und auch gepanzerte Fahrzeuge der Polizei im Einsatz haben. Und zusätzlich werden Polizisten mit Maschinenpistolen ausgerüstet sein.
This kind of action is now considered normal, a fair cost for the price of safety. But ultimately, prevention is about what happens outside the public's view. And that's the role played by the intelligence community. They are the front line of counter-terrorism, trusted by the public and governments to monitor, track, and prevent attacks by interpreting chatter. But they also face a more complicated and complex security environment, with threats coming from diverse groups and individuals. And with much of their work hidden, it's hard to identify how to improve their ability to thwart attacks, and whether it is possible to stop would-be perpetrators. Natalie Pohanen, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by Mohammed Alibiari from Dallas. He's a former advisor to the US Department of Homeland Security, which was created to protect Americans from terror attacks. And from Cardiff, Lee Doddridge. He's the director of a private security firm, Covenant, and a former member of the UK's National Counter-Terrorism Security Office. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to try and separate out the issues here so we can stay organized in our thinking. Lee, let me start first with the sort of physical threat prevention in this age of terror. Because you can set up a barrier and they can blow themselves up outside a barrier, they can blow up people at the barrier, blow themselves through the barrier, or take a truck and ram through the barrier. How do governments around the world actually deal with physical threat prevention when it seems as if somebody is determined to kill innocents, they more often than not get away with it?
Well, you've highlighted straight away the myriad of attack options that we face, and obviously if there's a number of options that they can attack, as in the methods that they use, then obviously we have to look at a number of combined defences. There's no point defending against maybe just a vehicle driving into somewhere, when actually if that vehicle was to stop and detonate, there's a whole range of issues that we need to look at, understand, and then build in and design what we call integrated security. So we've got layers upon layers. So one location could defend against a number of different attacks.
Mohammed, are we getting better or worse globally in fighting these asymmetric threats, particularly from a group like Daesh?
I think it depends on which country we're talking about. Certainly in the West, and especially in the United States and the United Kingdom, I would say we've gotten a whole lot better in the past couple of decades. In other countries, developing nations specifically, with weak central governance, population-based insurgencies that have proven themselves resilient over the decades, I am not as convinced that we are making progress. We're kind of recycling in those countries.
Mohammed, we see quite often countries almost in a knee-jerk way after a terror attack, particularly by a group like Daesh, whether it's the French or even in Turkey, we've seen it, and elsewhere, they'll bomb Raqqa or bomb an ISIS stronghold in the immediate aftermath of an ISIS attack. Does that help or does it not help?
The tool of deterrence, which those attacks are a tactical step to produce deterrence, have an effect if those terrorist groups, especially Daesh, that are trying to govern an area, experience a loss. But for groups that do not cover or do not control and govern a geographic location, deterrence is not as effective. The reprisal attacks, so to speak, don't work as well.
Lee, is the danger that they're trying to draw you into a fight that you don't want to get into?
I don't think there's a danger of being drawn into further conflict, and I totally agree with what Mohammed just said there. But I would also say that we need to almost balance the response, as in, yes, the deterrence and maybe striking at the heart of the cause, but at the same time focusing our resources on what we can do internally to defend against future attacks. So it's not just a single response in a retaliating factor. There is also looking at other areas where we can strengthen internally and make it a combined effort.
Mohammed, let's move on to bad ideas, battling bad ideas, policing, counter-radicalization programs, and so on. In the year 2017, we've just begun, are we doing better or are we doing worse in trying to get to the heart of the matter and stop those bad ideas?
Unfortunately, I think in this age where we, especially in the West, are experiencing middle-class economic squeeze that's driving a lot of political anxiety from like populist nationalisms on the rise, we're not seeing ourselves getting better. We're actually seeing a little bit of a regression. Especially in the United States, we're expecting a little bit more of a regression in this upcoming administration as compared to the previous one.
Lee, is the problem that many people see it as binary? We either are going to be safe or we're going to be unfree, and there's very little in between.
Well, I think we have to recognise the fact that this is a long-term threat issue that we're going to be facing. We also have to balance that with people being able to go about their daily lives, going about their business, welcoming tourists, and making our streets and our locations, whether it's in the United States, in the UK, or elsewhere in Europe. We need to get that balance in place. And it is something that we've been working and striving at in the UK now since, probably way back since 2001. I would say where we're probably failing at the moment in the UK in particular is still focusing on our Muslim communities. Only just recently we had a press release from a senior Metropolitan Police officer who pretty much made a statement to say that the communities must come forward and trust us and giving us information. I think they're quite wrong in focusing purely on Muslim communities. If we have a threat from ISIS, they're probably going to stay outside of those communities, and it should be drummed more into the mind of every community and not singling out a group. And I think we'll be wrong if we still pursue that form of education.
Right. Mohammed, parallels maybe with when the NYPD shut down their program spying on the Muslim community there. And I remember going through it. There was a lot of stuff about taxi drivers being suspicious because they went to Afghan kebab restaurants. Right, and so you had all this manpower, the NYPD, following these people because of what they ate, right? What lessons can be sort of derived from those mistakes, like the NYPD's?
I definitely agree with everything Lee just outlined. There's the NYPD approach was considered, for example, in the early Obama administration, the one that you just recently referenced, where it's very surveillance heavy over communities, and then basically injecting a whole lot of undercover law enforcement in there to report on anything. And pretty soon you can over capacity build and chase and go down a lot of rabbit holes that waste law enforcement resources. Today, radicalization or violent radicalization is mostly an online delivered reality, especially in the United States. So going into the coffee shops or the hookah bars or the local falafel restaurants is not necessarily, or the mosques is not necessarily going to identify
So,
those
Mohammed, sorry to interrupt you. How do we then stop that, the online radicalization, without pulling the plug on the internet and becoming totalitarian police states?
So I have, over the past 15 years, evolved a little bit also in my own analysis. I think today that you need to have law enforcement and security officials should have total awareness. So we as the public should accept that law enforcement and intelligence agencies should have total access to things online so that they can identify, so to speak, the dots to be able to connect behavior indicative of radicalization. But we should also, as functioning democracies in the West, provide a great deal of oversight and operational oversight from outside of the executive branch. And that mechanism, at least in the United States, is not currently available. And that's way the public will have confidence that the tools they are given to law enforcement and intelligence agencies are not being misused.
So is that sort of the digital equivalent of like needing a court order for a wiretap? You need some sort of court order in order to go into somebody's Facebook or Twitter?
Or I don't think you should bog it down by the court order step. You should go ahead. They should be able to go ahead and proactively follow up on whatever tip they get immediately, and just have it reviewed later by maybe a FISA court or something. Okay. But they need to have the ability to, encryption is a big issue that pops up in this sphere. But in developing countries, the issue is a little bit different. They're not necessarily talking about experiencing the same problem. Most of right now, the developing countries, especially in the Middle East, are becoming a lot more autocratic. And that repression is creating its own popular discontent in different subpopulations.
Okay, we are running out of time.
That's a political problem.
Sure, but Mohammed, sorry to interrupt you. We are running out of time. I want to get a final word from Lee as to whether he agrees with you that intelligence agencies and police agencies and so on, security services, should be able to go into people's digital work, their chatter and so on, and only have a review process after that. They don't have to seek permission beforehand. What do you think, Lee?
I think with the, as Mohammed said, I mean, it's the frequent use of these communication channels that is just, you know, it's so vast that we do need a policy change there. I mean, the recent last year that we saw in the States, with the federal agencies trying to get Apple to unlock an iPhone. I mean, these sort of things need to be happening almost instantaneously. If it means we need to get access into Telegram or to somebody's Facebook account, and yes, there should be processes and procedures in place in governing bodies to make sure that everything is monitored accordingly.
Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you very much for joining us, gentlemen.